Hello, YouTubeites. My name is Nightbreeze, the author of What I've Become, a science fiction high fantasy story about a man who's torn from his home, changed into a monster, and manages to escape onto an alien world. In an effort to get more people to read my newly published work, I've decided to start a series where I read my book to YouTube. I'll leave a link in the description of where you can find and buy this book for yourselves, and I would earnestly tell you guys to check it out. I mean, come on, it's only $3. If you're too cheap to purchase it yourselves, you can stay here and eventually hear the whole thing. But I would strongly suggest you buy it yourselves, or even spread the word about it. It really helps me out, and if things go right, I might be able to quit my night job and make writing my career. At any rate, this is something I've put a lot of time and effort into, and I would really appreciate it if more people read it, if only to tell me what they thought about my work. Also, don't mind the background sounds. I have a small child sleeping on my chest, and he tends to coo and grunt in his sleep. So, without further ado, here is the first chapter of What I've Become. I charged headlong through the bushes, my breath sounding harsh in my ears. I could hear my quarry up ahead as it bounded through the underbrush, its frightened squealing causing an uproar through the forest ahead of it. I honestly couldn't blame the poor animal for wanting to put as much distance as possible between the two of us. But I had needs too. A guy's gotta eat, after all. Without warning, the green foliage around me gave way to a clearing. I didn't even stop to think about what that would mean as I charged out, my gaze locked on the squealing, pig-like animal. My blood was pumping loudly in my ears, the beast screaming in my brain as I closed in on what was about to become my dinner. All that existed for me at that moment was the 200-pound sow making a break for the other side of the clearing. It was fast, real fast. Luckily for me, I was much, much faster. With one mighty leap, I closed the distance between us, landing square on the animal's back, spearing it with my long, sharp claws. I had unfortunately missed its heart, so the poor thing was still struggling underneath my powerful, gruesome frame, trying to get away despite the fact that it was already dead. I'm no sadist, so I ended its suffering with one swift stroke of my claw to its neck, removing its head and killing it instantly. I could feel the blood drip from my claws as I caught my breath, my mind racing as I calmed the beast within. It didn't take long, and after a few moments and some very deep breaths, I felt the programming recede. As the software slowly put itself on standby, so too did my claws, their movements almost painfully slow as they crept back into my fingers, then forearms, where they seemed to disappear entirely. I shivered a little in discomfort, the feeling still very unpleasant even after all this time. How long has it been? Months? Years? I thought morosely to myself. Before I could spiral any further down this dark line of thought, my sharp ears picked up the sound of a snapping twig, my honed survival instincts causing me to automatically turn to the sound, with no real input on my part. What I saw, though, caused my blood to run cold. Standing just at the tree line of this clearing was one of the natives of this planet. It was a beige, bird-like creature that stood at about 4.5 feet, its posture erect and its body clad in some sort of weird toga. Its legs resembled that of an ostrich or a secretary bird, though those comparisons really weren't quite right. This really wasn't that surprising, considering that this was an alien, and any similarities to an earthly creature would have been completely coincidental. Its wings were quite unlike any I had ever seen, what with the fingers and thumb right at the creature's wrist, similar to the placement of a bat's thumb in the center of its wing. When the whole thing was outstretched, the thing looked like how a normal bird's wing should look. However, when the thing was folded, the wings and feathers would fold perfectly along the creature's forearm, and was only really noticeable when the creature would bend its elbow, revealing the feathers that would stick out past it. The whole setup gave the creature the appearance that it was wearing some sort of weird New Age sleeve. The tips of the feathers on this one were a bright orange color, as was the rather tall crest on the top of the creature's head. Its neck was short, as was its curved, sharp beak, on which I could see a number of tattoo-like designs etched there, their meaning unknown. The head itself was much larger than any bird head I had ever seen, though that was to be expected. These things were intelligent after all. As interesting as all of this was, it was the creature's eyes that really captured my attention. They were a deep sea green, and somewhat larger than the sorts of eyes I would see on a human. I wasn't an expert on these creatures' emotions by any means, but after being a monster for so long, it had become incredibly easy for me to spot fear, and from what I could tell, this thing was absolutely terrified. Without missing a beat, the alien spread its wings, turned, and took off, trying to put as much distance between us as it possibly could. A smart move to be sure, considering what it was, but largely futile. Not because I could catch it before it escaped, nor did it even want to. No, the reason for its failed escape was the tree that it had spent the past 72 years growing in the exact spot where it could conk some poor soul attempting to flee from an alien monster. As I watched the alien's head come into contact with the trunk of said tree, I could feel the ghosts of the muscles that I no longer had on my face try to screw up into a wince. They were clearly unsuccessful, but that didn't stop my brain from trying for a second one when the poor alien fell from the ground with an audible thump. I carefully made my way over to the alien to check if it was all right. The bump looked pretty nasty, and I could see a small trickle of blood drip down along its feathers. Its breathing was strong, though, so I was sure its wound was just superficial. It would wake up in a couple of hours with a blinding headache, but otherwise it would probably be fine. I got back up to my feet and turned, about to leave the alien alone and get my food back to my lair, but stopped when I noticed where the sun was in the sky. Chances were that if I just left it out in the woods, the alien wouldn't wake up before the sun went down. On top of that, these woods had their fair share of predators that weren't me. A particularly enterprising animal could come along and start chowing down before the alien could wake up. Plus, the injury was kind of my fault, I thought to myself as I fiddled with my fingers, trying to figure out what to do. Ideas chased themselves around in my head before I finally let my arms fall limply to my sides, the reality of the situation settling in. Well, not really my fault. Not really. It was the tree's fault, but I can't exactly force the useless hunk of wood to pick up the bird and take it home. I turned back to the thing and bent down, gently slapping it on either side of its face in an effort to wake it up. I was unsuccessful in this regard, but an alien monster could hope, at least. I really didn't want to get anywhere near the closest town if I could help it. I'd seen what these things were capable of. I hadn't understood any of it, but just watching those armored ones run military drills had sent shivers down my spine. The unpleasant memory continued to run rampant through my mind for a few seconds before it slowly faded as I stared at the limp body in front of me. With a deep breath, I brought both of my hands together against where my cheeks had been, completely forgetting that I only had teeth there now. The slapping sound of my hands against bone and skin was enough to sober me up, though, and make me realize that I only had one option left. It was up to me to make sure the bird got home safely. Thoughts of being chased by an angry mob armed with torches and pitchforks flashed through my head as I scooped up the creature, but I shook those misgivings away. Hey, maybe I'm being too judgmental. Maybe they'll give me a fruit basket. And maybe a pink unicorn dancing on a rainbow will come down from the heavens and shower me with candy. Giving out one more sigh of frustration, I shook my head again, and hopefully shook out the dark thoughts lurking there. I then fixed the tree with my best death glare, and growled menacingly at it. So help me, if I get chased by an angry mob for this, I'm going to turn you into a frickin' shed, then burn you to the ground. I thought vindictively at the offending plant growth. The tree, unable to hear my vehement oath of vengeance, just continued to stand there, smugly pleased that its 72-year evil plan had finally seen fruition. Not wanting to waste any more daylight, I started making my way to town. I had been out this way plenty of times, and I was confident enough that I could make it blindfolded, but I'd still rather not do it after dark. I didn't really know what inhabited these woods after nightfall, and I wasn't too eager to find out. I was an alien monster, yes, but that didn't mean I had any leeway to be reckless. It was pure luck that I'd survived the crash, and I didn't want to tempt fate any more than I already had. Luckily, the alien was kind of on the light side, which meant that my trip to the village wouldn't be slowed down too much, if at all. Just because I found the bird light, though, didn't strictly speaking make it that way. Whatever those monsters had done to me gave me quite a few perks, one of them being a lot more strength than I was used to. The alien in my arms could have weighed anywhere between a half a pound to a half a ton, and I still would have said that the bird was on the light side. That wasn't a good thing, though. As useful as it was just another reminder of the terrifying reflection that stared back at me whenever I looked into a pool of water. Despite all my fears, I didn't meet anyone else on my way towards the entrance of the forest. While this definitely helped me when it came to getting the bird home, it did absolutely nothing to cure the gnawing loneliness that had been devouring me from the inside out. Neither did the bird in my arms for that matter, seeing as how you can hardly hold a conversation with something that was unconscious. This, of course, brought my mind back to the last time I had talked with another being, which in and of itself was a hell of a bittersweet memory to dredge up while carrying someone back home. How long has it been, though? A year? 3? I thought, completely unsure of myself. I didn't think it was a year, since I hadn't seen snow yet, but I couldn't take for granted that this world operated by the same rules that mine did. After all, I'd seen these birds do things that would have made Sir Isaac Newton roll around in his grave. Until I figured out what, if any of it meant, or how it worked, though, I was better off assuming that everything followed Newtonian laws. That's why I'd been recording days on the wall of my cave, in the hopes that I could quantify something about this strange world. If I remembered correctly, my count was somewhere in the 160s, 170s. But if I were being honest, the whole time was really just starting to blur. Not a bad place to get stranded, though, I thought, the woods around me still quite alive despite the late hour. I could hear insects chirping. There were amphibians nearby singing of love, and above me there were less intelligent birds, letting the whole woods know about their eggs and the joys of summer. Despite the strangeness of some of the things I'd seen, what really surprised me was just how Earth-like this place was. The leaves were all shapes that I didn't recognize, but they were still green. The birds and the amphibians all sounded a bit different than I was used to, but they were still birds and amphibians. Even that pig thing with all of its sharp-looking ridges on the front of its face was still a mammal. At least I figured it was a mammal. It could lactate, and it had hair. Of that much I was certain. What all of this meant, though, I had absolutely no clue. I wasn't a scientist, and I hadn't spent my college years studying evolution. What I did know about that, though, was that something like this was either impossible or very, very unlikely. As I was busy pondering the strange familiarity of this world, my sharp ears picked up the distant sounds of more intelligent bird aliens going about their day, completely ignorant of what was creeping up on their town. This pulled me back to the matter at hand rather quickly. It's rather amazing how a possible lynching can focus someone on the task at hand, I thought, adjusting the load in my arms while nervously trying to swallow the lump that had formed in my throat. It wasn't much longer after that I reached the break in the woods. I looked out with no small amount of longing at the distant town, though this feeling was tempered by a strong undercurrent of naked fear. It looked pretty peaceful, like something out of the Green Fairy book, or something similar. The houses were all made of this dark, beautiful wood, with a slate roofing and these weird rails along the top. Most of the rooftops I could see also had an additional door on the roof, both of these design choices strange by human standards, but not so for a species that could fly. The architecture also included a multitude of little touches that my enhanced vision could pick up from this distance. Wing-like motifs, etchings of the sun or moon over the door mantels, and a few weather vanes made to look like stylized birds, their wings stretched out to either the sun or the moon hovering over them. I couldn't read the marks on the weather vanes, but even if the sun didn't rise in the east and set in the west like it did in my world, the cardinal directions were still pretty easy to figure out. I was assuming that the sun did follow that convention, though, and by that logic, I was south of this town. Coincidentally, this also meant I was downwind of the town, and even though I no longer had a nose, just a hole in my face really, I could still smell the tantalizing scent of freshly baked bread. I took a deep, deep breath, reveling in the familiar, yet still alien scent, and I once again had to force my instincts down and not charge out there, looking frantically for the source of that delectable smell. I was still a monster after all. No need to draw the attention of a mob, or any soldiers if I could help it. With as much stealth as I could manage, I left the relative safety of the woods, and started making my way towards the town. I kept a low profile, but there just wasn't a whole lot of cover out there. In addition to this, there was still quite a bit of light out, so I didn't exactly have the darkness to protect me. Not to mention that I pretty much stood out like a sore thumb in the looks department, or the fact that I was carrying what looked like a dead body. Other than that, I still felt pretty sneaky, all things considered. Kinda like an alien ninja. Luckily for me, it didn't seem like very many birds came out this way. That being said, I was able to get fairly close without being seen. And by fairly close, I mean that I reached the halfway point between the town and the forest that I had called my home. Honestly, I felt this was just a little too close, especially after watching that one bird in armor zoom around like a freaking dragonfly. Seriously, that thing made my brain hurt. How that thing can fly like that in heavy armor is beyond me, I thought as I kneeled low to the grass, my eyes still sweeping the sky and the area around me. I still couldn't see anyone, but that only served to heighten my anxiety. Usually this area was not too busy, but still, I should have seen some soldiers overhead by now. Shrugging a bit to myself at the strangeness of it all, I turned my attention back to the town, and suddenly realized my mistake. There weren't any soldiers in the air, sure, but there were plenty on the rooftops, all their eyes on me. Many already had their weapons out, some burning with energies that I really didn't want to think about too hard unless I really wanted to give myself a headache for the rest of the night. I didn't know why they hadn't jumped me immediately, but I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. They're probably waiting for me to make the first move, I suddenly realized. Well, that serves me just fine. Any excuse to stave off a meeting with the big man upstairs for a few more minutes is fine with me. With utmost care, I laid the poor bird in my arms on the soft grass, then gave it a soft pat on the head, satisfied with a job well done. There. Now all I need to do is get back before they all kill me, I thought as my hands hovered over the hen. Then, with exaggerated slowness, I raised them above my head as I got back to my feet. The bird was covered in blood, most likely from the pig I had killed, but that hardly mattered to me at this point. All that I cared about was getting out of this in one piece. My mind worked furiously as I tried to think of the best route possible. Time seemed to slow to a crawl, and seconds turned into years. No matter how long I stretched this moment, though, I always came to the same conclusion. The moment I started to run, I was dead. Well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this right, I thought, my lungs filling with air as time reasserted itself. With one last nervous gulp, I turned and bolted, screaming bloody murder as I ran for the relative safety of the woods. Despite my screaming, my sharp ears could still pick up the shouts and cries of alarm behind me. I didn't stop for a second, though, nor did I let up on the screaming. In fact, this only served to intensify my howls, causing me to run out of breath a lot faster than I had initially intended. The pause in my screaming was only a momentary reprieve, because the second I had enough air in my lungs again, I immediately let out another round of terrifying wails, trying my best to communicate my displeasure of this whole situation to the universe around me. Surprisingly enough, it seemed like the universe decided to take pity on me, and I actually managed to make it to the relative safety of the forest completely unimpeded and unharmed. I slowed a bit and took a glance behind me, sighing in relief at what I saw. As far as I could tell, the birds weren't following me, nor had they fired a single shot from their crossbows or their magical glowy swords. They seemed far too concerned with the wounded bird that I had brought back, judging by the crowd. The only ones that had followed me hadn't followed me that closely, their forms hovering near the forest, but not landing or entering. Still, it may be wise to not go directly to my cave, I thought, as I gently scratched the back of my head. Probably better to head out to the clearing first and see if my pig is still there. At least then I might have something to eat before I move out. Yeah, I wasn't stupid. They knew I was here now. It was only a matter of time before they organized a monster hunting party and rooted me out. No sense in sticking around if I could help it. With a weary sigh and one last longing look at civilization, I turned back to the forest and began the long roundabout trip back to my lair. It took me a little while to reach the clearing where I had left the pig, and if I could still talk coherently, I would have sworn until the air around me was blue. I wasn't good with tracks, but it looked like some kind of big cat had come and dragged off my kill. Night was quickly approaching too, and I really didn't want to hunt while it was dark. This was an alien planet, and even though I could see pretty well without a conventional light source, I still didn't want to get caught with my pants down, metaphorically speaking. It looks like if I wanted dinner tonight, I was going to have to try my hand at fishing again. If I were being honest, I was probably better off saving my strength and waiting out the night. Just the thought of going to bed without supper made my stomach growl. But even with the increased strength and speed, I still had very little luck in catching those slippery little things. Oh, but they taste so good, and I'm going to need to eat something before I try and move, I argued with myself as I began the long walk back to my cave. I didn't even make it all the way back before losing the argument with my stomach. My cave was on the way to the river, though, so I continued walking that direction, my mind working furiously on any strategy that would help me catch those silvery, slippery morsels. I didn't have any real hope, though. I'd only managed to catch a total of 4 of the things before, all during the morning. The odds of going empty-handed and empty stomach tonight were pretty high. I could dream, though. I could always dream. Well, there you have it. The first chapter of my story, What I've Become. Book 1 of The Humanity Within. I'd really appreciate it if you guys went and purchased the whole book yourselves. It is $3 on Amazon right this second. I will leave a link in the description. Thank you so much for taking at least a couple of minutes of your time to sit down and listen to this. I plan to get out the next one as soon as I can, but I have a kid and I have a job, so it's not exactly first on my priority. It's pretty high. It's pretty high up there, but it's not the first thing I'm thinking of. But let me guy let you would not believe how many times I screwed up this entire thing. I just screwed up all over. It's just magic of editing is the only reason it's as smooth as it is. So anyway, as I was saying before I just screwed it up with my tongue, I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Let me know how you felt about the story in the comments, and please go buy my story. I worked really hard on it, and I could use at least just a little bit of feedback. Anyway, thank you so much for at least taking the time, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.